Welcome to the first session of the Lahore Literature Festival. Before we start, I just want to say I think we all need to give a huge round of applause to Razi and his team. I don't think we all know all the difficulties they've been facing, but many of us know that this is the third year where they've had to face many challenges at the last minute, and the fact that they keep going is a remarkable testament to their dedication and iron will and belief in this festival. And the fact that so many people turn up at this hour on a Saturday morning when there's a venue change at the last minute, I think also speaks to how much this festival means to the city, and what an extraordinary thing it's been over the last few years. So thank you, Razi, and thank you everyone else at the LLF. Of course, it's excellent programming to start the day with Michael Palin, which is what has woken people up and got them out of here. And I think he's already run to several people who are crazed and obsessed fans. Michael probably doesn't require a huge amount of introduction, and at the same time probably does, because I expect there are people in here who know one or two of the things he's done, but actually he is a man of so many different parts that we could have a whole day of Michael Palin discussions, but we won't, because he wants to listen to people rather than to talk about himself. Of course, we all know Michael is one of the members of Monty Python, one of the most important, influential comedy acts of possibly ever, which has spawned its own word, Pythonesque, which can be found in all dictionaries describing a particular kind of surreal or absurdist humor. We might ask Michael what he thinks of that definition in a little while. He's also had a very successful life as a traveler, travel presenter, travel writer, which has brought him to this part of the world before for his series Himalaya. He's also gone from the North to the South Pole, around the world in 80 days, and all over the place, really. In addition to which, he's found time to be a novelist, a diarist, an actor. For people of my generation, of course, A Fish Called Wanda is particularly beloved. And we are, I mean, I could do a whole list of all the honors he's won, but that might embarrass him and would go on for a very long time.
Oh, no, I love it. I love it. I can take praise. I can take it.
He has won many honors and awards, and is regularly on polls of, you know, the greatest comedian of all time, etc. Please join me in welcoming Michael Palin to Lahore.
Thank you.
I start Michael quite early because there was something I read some years ago. There's a wonderful book called The Conversations, which is interviews, it's really chats between the writer Michael Ondaatje and the film editor Walter Murch. And in it, Walter Murch at one point says that something to the effect of the people who have the greatest chance of being content or happy in their lives are those who, as adults, are doing some version of the thing they loved when they were 11 years old. Yeah. The idea being that at 11 you're old enough to have actually started to form your own personality rather than just replicating your parents and siblings, and you're young enough that peer pressure is out of you, and so there's something essential in character. At 11, what did you love? What were you...
I loved films, I loved movies, I loved almost everything to do with America, I'm ashamed to say. No, I'm not ashamed to say that. We were very undernourished in Britain at that time. Yeah. I would have been, in 1954, so Everest had just been climbed and Queen Elizabeth had just been crowned, so there was a little boost. But generally, the country was tired, the attitudes were tired. My poor parents had been brought up and lived through 2 world wars and a major depression, and I can remember just thinking that their energy had gone, and the energy of the country had gone, and people were looking for something else to do. And at 11, the wealth, the affluence of the world was in America, and bits of it was sort of coming back to us. And I had some friends who went to America, and they came back with all sorts of bubble gum and cards and things that were just designed, just things, not the things you really needed, but just stuff. And I'm thinking, oh, this is wonderful. So I was watching American films. I was listening to American music at the time. I suppose it was just about Elvis Presley around about that time. And I was just beguiled by the fact that there was a world out there that had more energy than the world I was in, and it was something I wanted to find out about. So I think I felt there was an excitement ahead, and I was a reasonably happy child.
Yeah. Among the films you were watching, was comedy a big deal very early on, or was that a love that developed later?
Yes, comedy was a big deal very early on. I mean, people like Jerry Lewis I was laughing at then, and English comedians like Norman Wisdom. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Norman Wisdom. He was a Norman Wisdom with his tight little jacket like that, and he's extraordinarily popular in Albania. And almost nowhere else. But I like slapstick comedy. I listened to a lot of radio comedy. This was, of course, the era when Spike Milligan and Peter Sellers and Harry Seacombe were putting together the Goon Shows, which was just something for a schoolboy, a totally marvellous thing to discover, because it was quite different from anything your parents would have ever imagined should be comedy. It was just absurd, it was surreal, it had characters that spoke in funny voices like that, oh dear, you know. And we only had one radio set in the house. It was a huge, big set like that. It was all sort of carved mahogany and all that. It was my father's greatest possession. And I was only allowed to listen to it every now and then. And I used to be allowed to listen to the Goon Shows. And I just hoped and prayed that my father wouldn't come in when I was listening to them. And of course he did. And he came in just in the middle of one of them, the famous echoes, I want to join the river police, and silly things like that. And he just looked at the radio and said, has it broken? And I said, no, this is just something funny. It's not funny to me. So I went out. It was equally embarrassing when Elvis Presley first broke onto the scene around about that time. And Heartbreak Hotel, which was the one, again, you know, his delivery of and that kind of this halting, booming, echoing delivery. I'd never heard anything like that from the crooners that my father listened to and all that. And he came in once again and said, I'm sure the set is broken, he kept saying. So that was Elvis and Spike Milligan and the radio set that sort of governed my little world then. That was my breakthrough moment.
Was there a moment when you went from listening to or watching comedians who you loved to thinking, actually there are things in here that I want to react against or do things differently? Because, I mean, Python really was a departure.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, I think, Python was, I suppose, it was born out of the Goon Shows. I mean, everybody in Python will say there was something about Spike Milligan and his attitude, his kind of anarchic attitude, anything goes. You don't have to have a point, or you can have a point. It can be satirical, it can be non-satirical, it can be visual, whatever. That was something that was common to all of us, because we're all about roughly the same age. John very much older. And it shows. No, bless him. But I think at the time, elements, little scraps of the humour we picked up when we were in our teens appeared later in Monty Python, and that's what made Monty Python work very well, because it wasn't something that was imposed from on top by the BBC or anybody else saying this is the way we want you to do. That's the radio's broken again. Spirit of my father is in the room, and it's what made. So it wasn't imposed from the top, it was from all these influences that we'd all gathered in our childhood, and that's what made Python deliver in lots of different ways. It didn't necessarily govern the content, but certainly the delivery was sort of very, very shotgun.
How do you feel about the word Pythonesque? Do you think the definition, is one you would stand by? And
I think Pythonesque is fair enough. I mean, it's a sort of acknowledgement that there is the sort of what makes me laugh is the ridiculousness of the human behaviour generally. I mean, the way we all are, and we take ourselves terribly seriously, but basically down to earth. It's much better to have a view of humanity is fairly absurd. I think it's healthier. Then you can work up from there and find a few exceptions rather than the other way around. So I suppose Pythonesque going in the dictionary means that it must have had an echo in for a lot of other people. There must be things they want to describe as Pythonesque, which is usually just a surreal look at the world, or things that you find unbelievable, which of course is happening to us all in all reality now. I mean, Donald Trump, I won't mention him at all. That's the last time I'll mention Donald Trump.
No, we're going to mention him a little later, I'm afraid.
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh dear. Well, after I've gone, I hope.
But I just want to know how really the writing partnerships work with you and Terry Jones, because that started at university, didn't it?
Yes, I went to Oxford. I had no idea of playing comedy or being involved in comedy or being a scriptwriter or an actor. I was born in Sheffield in the north of England. People didn't become scriptwriters and actors from there somehow. The big centres were London or Manchester or something like that. So university was a wonderful chance to meet people from all over the country who had similar ideas to your own, without a school teacher or someone being in the room saying, you've got to sit there or you've got to do this. So I could make friends with people with whom I had similar interests, and I got to know Terry Jones, who was interested in acting and also in comedy, and also a man called Robert Hewison, who I have to credit, because he asked me in my first year, he said, look, we're fans of Spike, we tell jokes, why don't we get together and produce a 30-minute cabaret act, which we can then get some money, we can go and play at the university sort of occasions and all that. And this was quite beyond my comprehension as a Sheffield schoolboy. Cabaret was something that came from Paris, involved ladies kicking their legs up. But he said, no. He was very metropolitan, London-based. It's all over London now, clever cabarets and all that. People pay good money for it. And so I said, well, how do you go about getting a booking? He said, leave it to me, I know lots of people. And so the very first time I ever did comedy in public was with the Oxford University Psychological Society Christmas party. That was my first ever gig. And we did half an hour, it went through in total silence. And at the end, someone came up and said, that was good. That was very, very good. And I realised maybe the audience of psychologists work like that, they're thinking too much rather than letting go. But anyway, through meeting these two people, I thought, well, just possibly I could carry on doing more of this. And in 1964, at the Edinburgh Festival, I was in a review with Terry Jones and 3 others, and it was a great success. And this was another sort of step on the road, because it was an international festival. People from all over the world came to see our show, and various talent scouts from London came, and I suddenly realised that possibly, just possibly, there was a tiny glimmer of a chance that I could do this for a living. But my father was very much against it. He wanted me to go into some professional job rather than something Pythonesque.
Right.
So, but it was around about that time that I started writing with Terry. We left university. We got on very well, and it's important to have a writing partner. I think it would be very good for us to sort of bounce ideas off each other.
And how did that work later within the larger group of Monty Python? I mean, did you, because there were a couple of writing partnerships in there.
Yes.
Was there a lot of squabbling about, well, this is what we've written and we think it should be used, and the other guys saying, no, that's no good?
What we would do is that we would go away and write in our separate groups. John Cleese and Graham Chapman wrote together, and they were marvellous. They wrote the Parrot sketch and things like that. Terry Jones and myself. Eric wrote on his own, but was happy about that, wrote a lot of musical stuff. And Terry Gilliam, who was a very, very important part of the Python mix. There'd never been anyone doing animation in comedy in England before. And then we come together at the end of the week, and people would read the various sketches, and I was deputed to read what Terry and I had done, and John read what he and Graham had done. And you just... certain sketches everybody fell about, and that was fine. They wanted an A-list, and they didn't have to be, that would be fine. That goes straight in the show. Others worked halfway, but not the full sketch, so maybe they would go from one writing team to another, would take it over and all that. And then with this wonderful sort of session we'd have when we just try and knit them all together in the strangest way, because what was liberating about Monty Python was that we didn't have to go through the traditional sketch format, which was popular at the BBC then, you know, a beginning, a middle, and there had to be a punchline at the end. Yeah. And we felt if you've got a good beginning, but a lousy middle and no punchline, well, use that and then cut to animation. Terry Gilliam will take you in some strange, weird world of his, and you'd end up in the next sketch. So that was quite nice. So it meant that you didn't have to throw away good stuff merely because it didn't have a proper ending. And those sessions were great. And then there was some squabbling, because occasionally, you know, there were moments when people felt their work was better than it had been judged at the time. And Terry Jones, dear Terry, who got very Welsh about it. And when I mean very Welsh, I mean he got very passionate. And John would completely wind him up. Yeah. And Terry was like, I don't know what's wrong with that. His voice would go higher and higher. I think that's really, really funny. I mean, that is so funny. And John would say, stop being so Welsh, Terry. Calm down, calm down. We don't hate you just because you're from Wales. It's just we prefer to keep you there. Oh, that's typical of your attitude. So it developed into a sort of Python sketch of its own. Right. And once ended up with Terry throwing a typewriter at John. Quite a heavy typewriter. Unfortunately, missed him. Otherwise, we would have had no Python, really. Well, we would have had no pet shop owner. no, I was a pet shop owner.
You were a pet shop owner. I'm going to have to ask the Trump question, because it seems that as the world is getting sort of more beyond belief in some ways, that the references to Python to sort of describe or explain or refer to our political events become greater. So during the Republican primary, you had Ted Cruz, who was running against Donald Trump, comparing him to brave Sir Robin at one point when he was refusing to do a debate together. More recently, the New Yorker reveals Donald Trump to be the man beneath the Black Knight's armor.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And then perhaps most bizarrely of all, at the end of all this, during Trump's inauguration, there was a point when the marching band played the Monty Python theme.
Well, there we are.
Well, there we are. Well, so here's my question on the age. Now we are, you know, it's no longer, when he was candidate Trump and no one thought he would do it, or very few people did, it was easier to laugh around the whole thing. And my question, has Trump sort of outflanked satire and killed it? Has he placed new demands on it, or is he revealing actually the necessity for it as the only way of dealing with, or not the only way, but as a significant way of talking about him?
Well, the figures show that he has done a great deal for the satire industry. Ian Hislop, who's the editor of Private Eye, was on the radio the other day saying a lot of people have suffered from Trump's election. I have to say the satire business is not one of them. Their circulation is higher than it's ever been in its history. Saturday Night Live just been through some rocky periods. I've been on it myself earlier, and I know some shows are not as good as others. Now that's put on about 20% just because of Alec Baldwin doing Donald Trump. So I think people need comedy as a sort of release from all this sort of frustration they're feeling. But at the same time, I think you've got to be a little bit careful of making a figure of fun, because that sort of dismisses him, and I think he quite likes that, so long as he's talked about, you know. As long as his name is there, he doesn't really mind so much. Right. I think he's making a ridiculous fool of himself, trying to close these shows down and saying, as soon as you say to somebody, that's not funny, it's funny. Right. I mean, this is why I first remember at school, you know, when I laughed most of all, or wanted to laugh most of all, was when we had a teacher who said, now, shut up, this is not funny. Immediately everyone wants to giggle, you know. No, stop laughing. Next person who laughs, I'm going to empty this room, you know, all that. And people would say that. You just want to go. So I think, you know, Trump is trying to do that, and I think that's where it's all going to go, I don't know. I mean, it's up in the air, but I think one's got to be a bit careful. I personally think that with comedy and satire is used best against rather grey men who have no personality whatsoever and yet are running our affairs. And then you've got to find a sort of way in. Trump's so obvious, really. He put on that strange hair, and nothing is stranger than his own hair. He's not here, is he? Sorry, Donald, I would have voted for you. And I think that it is good satire finds ways in to close doors. And these doors at the moment seem so open.
Right.
But
Yes.
it's not perfect situation. But we'll see.
Right. Well, now we've dispensed with him.
Yeah,
So we don't have to talk about him anymore.
Well, if only we could.
Yeah. So here's the question, the clever bridge question to lead into the next stage of your life. Does comedy travel? Because one of the things that people sometimes have said about Monty Python is that, it relies on a certain degree of knowledge. You have to know what the allusions and the references. And yet it seems to me, as you and I were walking to this room, Pakistanis were running up to you saying how important you've been. And you, of course, have traveled all around the world. And what is your view of that idea that is comedy a universal or is it very culturally specific?
I think, no, I'd say it can be both. I think there's a universal way of looking at human behaviour and the way we all are, the way our lives just are, the way we grow up, the way we look, our preferences, the way we dress, the way we talk, our relationships, all that. I found great similarity all over the world. I found this in my travel programmes, that laughter is very often the way to make instant communication with people. But I think in the specifics of humour sometimes are very local, and you can get a whole other level of comedy out of knowing exactly, being really forensic about what you're making jokes about. So it it is a mix. I mean, there's a universal comedy, but there's also a delight in comedy that is so particular that only people who've ever organised a Lahore Literary Festival will ever laugh at, for instance, or something like that. The little groups where you'll have someone knowing something absolutely on the inside and making a joke out of it is very satisfactory too.
So when you were doing Monty Python, were you, as it were, pining for the fjords in the manner of a dead parrot? I mean, how did the travel come about? Was that an early love?
Pining for the fjords was not my line, sadly. It was John's line, but it's very.
Give him some credit for finding a way.
It very well describes my travel desires. Sorry, what was the question?
Well, the question is when. I mean, did the love for travel and interest, did it start right in the beginning where there was a fascination with America and perhaps wanting to go there, or was it a thing that sort of crept up on you later on?
I think it was there from very early on. I can just remember always wanting to know, what lay beyond the next sort of street, road, hedge, hill. I loved very early on stories of exploration, of people finding new worlds where no one had ever been before. That was an enchanting idea, just extraordinary, and appealed to me. I think partly, again, it was because it was denied to me, because no one ever really left Sheffield in the 1950s. And travel was to Nottingham or Leeds or somewhere like that. You've been to Leeds? Oh, yeah, what's it like? So it was something there that was as I say, it was sort of prescribed, and so I wanted it all the more. And then it kind of, I suppose I went away to school, I went away to Oxford, so I did a little bit of travelling there, but the only real journey I did, which sort of was anywhere near what I really wanted to do, was in 1972, when Terry Jones and myself actually did go to America to see this wonderful land that we were, land of plenty, music and fashion, all that, on which we were brought up. And I went all across the States and came back slightly disillusioned, but it was still quite exciting. The disillusionment, actually, oddly enough, was I remember never having quite enough money. Americans always seemed to have more money than we did, and we were always kind of dollar bills and finding quarters and all that to pay for things. And, that's what it sort of seemed at the time. But it was there, this desire to travel was there, and it was frustrating because we would go, sometimes with Monty Python or other things I've done, we would go on foreign publicity tours, and you'd go all over the place, and yet you would never see anything other than a hotel room or an airport lounge or a TV studio, and all the bits in between you never saw, and I found this increasingly frustrating. So when the BBC came to me in 1987 and put to me this idea of going around the world in 80 days, I think I was probably ready for it in some strange way. The sort of the sort of roads of my life had come together, boing, to this point. Oops, sorry. And it seemed, I just said yes to it. I was offered it. I didn't know what it was going to be like. They just said, you're going to go around the world in 80 days, you're going to be a camera following you all the way, it's a recreation of Jules Verne's story, it's going to be pretty tough. What do you think? And I said, no, I'll do it. Yeah. And they said, oh, that's very good, because you're the best person, for all the various reasons they put up. And it was only much later, when we were in India, actually, in what's now Chennai, Madras, and the director had had a couple of beers and admitted that I was the 5th person they'd asked to do it. But I don't mind that. Yeah. I would have said yes anyway, because to me it was just a great opportunity.
Is there a favourite journey for you?
Well, I'm not saying just because I'm here, but Himalaya, as I would say it, Himalaya was, I think, the most spectacular journey, and also covered the most, a lot of different ground, different sort of religions, cultures, because we went right from Pakistan right to China and into almost onto the border with Burma. Very rich culturally too. So I think that was probably my favourite, but I enjoyed them all in a way. I mean, I think when we were doing it, the days when I wanted to give up, we got some very tough places, but on the whole, I enjoyed it. And I was always quite amazed how literally Python and the travels came together, because the longest journey we ever did was called Full Circle, and it was all around the Pacific. And we started in an island called Little Diomede. And Little Diomede Island is in the Bering Strait, just, you know, the straits where America and Russia almost meet. And it's right on the international date line. Most of the year, it's iced. There's ice. It's very difficult to get to. We were there. There was a small Inuit family community living there, about 60 people, who the Americans wanted to move them to somewhere nice and comfortable where they get a proper education. But they said, no, we're happy with our old traditions on this island. We filmed with them for a day. It was very nice, very difficult to get there, very hard. Right at the beginning of the program, I did a long piece to camera about what we were going to do. Got down to the bottom of the hill where a group of the elders had been following me all day, looking at me and sort of wondering, and then looking at me again, and then wondering, looking at me again. And they came down to the shore, and we were just about to leave, and one of the elders came forward and said, hey, aren't you the guy from Monty Python and the Holy Grail? I thought, so there is a segue here. These are not two different worlds. Right. They'd hated it. Oh. No, because they'd watched it the night before.
I mean, you probably travelled more than most people have, and I wonder what, we're living in a world that the word divisive is increasingly used to describe the world we're in, and I wonder, for someone who has travelled all over the place, whether there are particular divisions that you're aware of in human beings and human experiences, or whether after you travel a while, everything sort of seems part of the same whole.
No, I mean, there are lots of divisions. I'm a great believer in diversity. I don't want the world to be a homogeneous mass. I think it's very, very important to keep your local ideas, cultures, languages. It's difficult. We travelled with a small film crew, with about 6 of us, and our idea was not to sort of prove a point about anything, but to just engage with the people we met. And we decided quite early on that it was probably best to just meet people on the street, as it were, try and sort of just watch them doing ordinary things and try and extrapolate something from that about how they were. And I found that people responded throughout the world to curiosity. Most people were very interested that you were interested in them. Right. And they would then, they would have a joke about the food you're eating or something like that. And what I found was in the poorest parts of the world, in the poorest communities, they'd be the people who would give you the most. I mean, this has been said by many travellers, but the hospitality you would receive in a sort of refugee camp in Algeria or something like that, people would be sure to give you the best food they had, whether it was a camel liver or something like that, but that they would make sure they gave you the best food. You always had tea and all that sort of thing. Whereas, the most difficult places to film, the most difficult place to film in the world was Beverly Hills, where they have an enormous amount of money, but every house is sort of locked, triple locked. And there's nobody there anyway, because they're all gone off to Acapulco, I don't know. And the only people there are people from Mexico, who won't be there much longer, I think, clipping the lawns. Yeah. And so it was very difficult to find anybody who would talk there. And so that was an interesting angle on it. In terms of sort of division, anyone with a gun, obviously, I have to say, that was rather difficult. There was difficult areas, crossing borders, this strange obsession that every country has about you photographing a bridge or something like that. Right. No, not the bridge. Yeah. The road, yes, but not the bridge. Yeah. No, sorry, that road starts here, and then then the river, and then it goes over there. Yeah. Not the bridge. Strange things like this, and of course military installations crop up everywhere. Oh, did you know that's a military installation there? Oh, we thought it was a shed. No, not a shed! That's our nuclear weapons program. So that was always, they were difficult, you couldn't get past those, and I think there were certain, occasionally extreme sort of religious problems where people didn't like us entering because, they were, because of their religion prohibited it, but very, very rarely, very rarely. And I have to say that, the Muslim religion, they were always extremely friendly, and I think people sort of were perplexed by the fact that you can go into a mosque if you want to and just take your shoes off, and anyone can go in there and observe the worship and all that sort of thing. And I found that quite encouraging and very discouraging, the attitudes that you hear in the world today about Muslims. Anyway, so I would say religion and weapons, extreme religion and heavy weapons are probably the areas we didn't touch too much. Yeah. But the rest, people were remarkably open and very, very keen to talk about just the ordinary things, their children and how they're going to school and all that, or not going to school. Anyway, shut up, Michael. That's not...
No, don't shut up, Michael.
No.
You do use your voice to amplify the voices of those who might be less heard, whether it's Syrian refugees, whether it's villagers in India who are being displaced by mining companies. And I wonder whether that is related to the travel and going around and feeling invested in people's lives, or is it just something that's always been there?
Well, I don't know. I've always been more interested in the poor than the rich. The rich people get on with it anyway. They don't read. It's quite interesting. But I was identified with people perhaps up slightly less. My parents weren't very well off at all. Everything was sort of, rationed out, and it was that period when there was rationing anyway. And I'm not saying that I had a tough childhood, but I'm sort of very much aware of a slightly puritanical feeling of things have to have some reason, some purpose, some function. There's a lot of, as I said earlier, a lot of stuff in the world today that nobody needs at all, things that make your right ear smell better or something like that, or whatever, or, shoes that look like bunny rabbits. I just see them and I think, well, what's the point? Yeah. Sorry, that's a very gruff old answer, isn't it? I sound like a real killjoy. But I'm just more interested in the stories of people who have less and make more of it. What I found when we travelled is very often in the poorer villages, their life would be very simple and very clear and very inventive. They could do everything. They could make anything out of anything, most of the people there, because they had to. And I think making a lot out of a little is far more interesting to me than making a little out of a lot.
Now, I have a particular interest in asking about something which I think not enough people ask you about, which is Michael Palin, novelist.
Oh, well. Now, you're a proper novelist, so I'm honoured that you should even notice that.
No, but I mean, is that something you'd always wanted to do? What is your, you're a great reader of novels?
Yes, I read novels. I just like stories, and I've always enjoyed telling stories. And I think everything I've done, whether it's even Monty Python, or writing sketches, or writing The Ripping Yarns, which is a series of longer sketches, which was a story format. That's always interested me. And I feel that and I love writing, so I feel as a writer with an imagination in there, with things you want to say, that you've got to write a novel at some point.
Right.
You've got to somehow get it down there. I was brought up really on writing with teams, I wrote with Terry, and then with the wider team was Monty Python. The travel shows were done sort of as a team. So writing a novel, I've written two, one in 1994 and one about 6 years ago. Solitary occupation, which I found quite unnerving to start with. I wanted to be able to read this to my fellow writer at the end of the day or something like that. And then I thought, well, if I do that, then I'm going to lose my own authority over what I'm writing. This has got to be something I want to write. I've got to create all the characters, I've got to make it all work out, I've got to come up with the story. So it was a challenge, and satisfying, actually, in the end.
Yeah. Will there be another one?
I hope so, yes. Yeah. I do admire novelists, and I think it's a very, really tough thing and to get it just right. And I've written two novels, and neither of them are just right, but there's lots in it that I'm very, very pleased with.
I've written 7 and none of them are just right, so...
Well, maybe there's no such thing as the just right novel.
Possibly not. Well,
you know
Tolstoy might have done it, but...
Well, yes, but he was Russian.
Yeah. I think we've got just under 15 minutes, so I'm going to open up to the audience. But I want to tell you one story. I was in London a few years ago, and I was at the back of a black cab, and the cabbie was talking to me about some celebrity who'd been in his cab, and he said, of course, you've been a cabbie long enough, you get all kinds of famous people. And I said, if you could choose one person to have in the back of your cab, who would it be? And he thought for approximately half a second, and he said, well, it would have to be Michael Palin, wouldn't it?
Oh, well, that's my... You must give me his number, I'll get a free cab ride.
So I'm very pleased to have had him in the back of my cab here, but I'm going to open him up to the larger cab. Can we have the lights on so I can see people raising their hands as they have a question? Might that be possible? Lights? Anyone?
It's possible to kill that light at the back or just dim it a bit. Lights up.
Lights?
I can't see anybody here, just heads.
Does anyone here know about lights?
Yeah.
Well, there's a gentleman in the front row waving his hand, so we'll go to him first for a question.
Hi, I'm a massive fan, Michael, and you to say two quick questions. Firstly, something everybody in Lahore wants to know. Did John Cleese really take the silly walk from our Wagah border ceremony?
The question, should I just repeat it for those who can't hear, was what everyone in Lahore wants to know is, did John Cleese take the silly walks of the Ministry of Silly Walks from the Wagah border ceremony?
Yeah. John, of course, said they took it from him, so I just have to... he gets a retainer from both the Indians and the Pakistanis, but it was amazing.
On your journeys through the world, political upheaval sort of follows you around. When you were in Russia, you were going to court for the Russian Revolution, then when you were in South America and so many other places. What impact does it have on you? Looking back, and then there's a lot of places like the Yangtze River, for example, which doesn't really exist anymore. And they've built the three gorges dam now. And you've seen it, and you've been to Kamchatka, and these places where nobody else has really had access to.
Yeah.
So you feel that sense of responsibility that you're capturing it for all the rest of humanity, people who you
It's an interesting... Oh, sorry, do you want to...
Oh, sorry, the question is, so a lot of... Michael's been in his travels to a lot of places that either don't exist anymore in the form they did, or there's been political upheaval that's changed them. So what is the responsibility he might feel? Is he capturing these places for all of us at a certain moment in time?
It's very difficult because things never happen instantly like that. You're not there like a reporter who is sent out because something has happened. They happen around you, and I must say the pole-to-pole journey was quite extraordinary. I think we're probably the last film crew to have gone through the Soviet Union from north to south, and it was quite remarkable. We were on a train near Kiev and talked to someone on the train, and he was a Ukrainian. He said, "I'm from Ukraine," and I know that one day, maybe not in my lifetime, but maybe in my children's lifetime, there will be an independent Ukraine. I just know it, and hardly likely. Ukraine was independent 4 months later. And things just don't happen as quickly as that. So we couldn't actually, it was hard to comment on it. It was just like happening in your wake. And what one was hoping was that one would talk to people who were in the cradle of history, like the Soviet Union was at that time, like that gentleman there, and try and get the gentleman we talked to about Ukraine, and try and get a feeling of what he felt the balance of history was at that moment. But things move so much faster than you ever expect. Very excitingly we went down then through Ethiopia, and it was just the time when Colonel Mengistu, who was kind of quite a brutal dictator, had been overthrown by an army of really young men from Tigray in the north. And we would be driving down there and we would see tanks on the roadside smashed, and at the various places we stopped at, just these 14, 15-year-olds with guns. And there was this incredible mood of elation that they had managed to throw off a sort of military dictatorship just by, their own sort of commitment to the cause. These were not really hard-nosed professional soldiers. And that was something quite remarkable. And so we incorporated that a little bit. But our problem always was the programme was shown much later. It wasn't like this was going to be news the next evening. In fact, we had, on this same trip, we went through Zambia, and Kenneth Kaunda, who'd been 22 years in power, had lost the election that day to Frederick Chilebe, I can't remember his name was. Anyway, they were having a great party at one place. We stopped and said, what's the celebration here? Hey, yes, BBC are here, BBC. And they gave me a very long interview about, wow, it's all going to be great, and we got rid of Kaunda, and this new man was terrific. And I said, that's very good, thank you very much. It's really nice to talk to you. Yeah, so when's this going to be on, tonight? And we said, well, no, probably about a year and a half. And they practically chased us out of town. So it's hard to be a news programme. But what one can do is reflect the underlying feelings of people, which then people who've maybe watched my travels will say, I understand a little bit better why this happened later on. But I think you've got to leave it to good reporters and good news gatherers to really bring you the actual reasons for why things happen.
Other questions?
Monty Python's handling of religion. So Monty Python, like within the Life of Brian and Holy Grail, and even in the Flying Circus, Monty Python finds humor in religion, which is, let's say, in this part of the world, a difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
So was it difficult then, considering the legal positions or the positions of the BBC in the United Kingdom at the time? And if that changed, how did that change, and what degree or what sort of advice would you give someone from here if we wanted to change?
Well, yes. Have a go and keep your head down. The Life of Brian was an independent film. It wasn't, BBC weren't involved, there was none of that. Very interestingly, we had written the script and supplied it to a company called EMI, big British production company, and someone within EMI had said this is a very funny, relevant, important kind of piece of work, and we should be doing it. And they agreed to give us some money to start production of the film, and we sent people out to Tunisia to start building the sets. And then the head of EMI, a man called Michael Carreras, actually read the script of The Life of Brian and was utterly horrified. Said, we can't do this, it's blasphemous. We're a top company, we've got shareholders, we can't, and he said, stop it straight away. So they withdrew their money. And this, we thought, was going to be it. The Life of Brian would never be made. And then, and this most wonderful thing, I get quite tearful of this, because it's all about someone who's very dear to me, called George Harrison. And, the Beatles had been an extraordinary part of my growing up. I think it was what the Beatles represented in the 1960s, was a voice for, wasn't American in music. There was something was even London, it was from Liverpool, and it was just to see the Beatles conquering the world was something encouraging to us all. So the fact that Eric Idle was out in California, met George Harrison, George said, I'm a huge Python fan, let me see the script. I had a look at the script, and he said, yeah, and he gave he mortgaged £5 million of his own money to get the film made. Which many people said later, George, 5 million, why did you do that? He said, well, I just wanted to see it. Which is, the most expensive admission card in history. So it wasn't easy to get the film made, and I think without this remarkable situation of an independent individual saying, I believe in this film, it might never have been made. And we were able to make it then without compromise. Going into the subject matter and why it was made, I think that although it was about the Bible story and all that sort of thing, that you have to remember the Anglican religion is rather sort of low-key about all this, it doesn't make a great fuss. People don't get terribly angry about their religion in England particularly, although people did after we made the film. But I think they felt that just because we were using the Bible story meant that we were attacking Christ, the basis of Christianity, the basis of faith, which we weren't at all. What we were attacking, if there was anything, was the authority assumed by people as a result of believing in Jesus Christ and all that, whereas Jesus himself was actually quite anti-authoritarian and rather good. So, in a sense, people missed the point. They just thought it's Monty Python and religion, they must be mocking. And in fact, we were just, by getting the two parallel careers, we were avoiding doing that. But it did cause a bit of a stir. The large parts of America, middle America, don't show it at all. But even within Britain, there were places that didn't show it. Swansea, for instance, individual cities were able to opt out of showing the film for various reasons. But the best story of this was that there was a town called Aberystwyth, Wales. I'm sorry if there's any Welsh people here because they're getting a bit of stick today. Anyway, it just so happened that Aberystwyth was one of the places where Monty Python and the Life of Brian was banned. And they had an election, and the new mayor of Aberystwyth in 2008 was elected. It was a very vigorous council woman called Sue Jones-Davis. Now, Sue Jones-Davis had played Brian's girlfriend in The Life of Brian. She was the one who ran around naked and got all the revolutionaries going and waved her finger and all that. And she became mayor of Aberystwyth. And the first thing she did was to ask Terry and myself to go up to Aberystwyth, and we all went arm in arm to the theatre for a showing of The Life of Brian for the first ever. Just a great, great moment. So in a way, Sue on film had become, Sue in real life. She'd fought for her religion. But anyway, yeah.
I'm being told we have 3 minutes, so one last question. Someone raised their hand and waved vigorously. Gentleman has stood up. It's okay.
Good morning, sir. Thank you so much for being here today, despite everything. My question is, there is this increasing trend within comedians to share their experiences and their memoirs. You did that. You shared your diaries. And I'm curious to know, when a comedian turns an author or a writer and shares his or her experiences like that, does a comedian ever get embarrassed of the things that he or she has said or written? Did you ever, when you were revisiting or recollecting your memoirs to be published, was there ever a sense of embarrassment?
Of embarrassment?
Yeah.
Yes, oh, definitely, yeah. I get embarrassed very easily.
He's English.
Yeah. I get embarrassed, I'm apologetic. We say sorry 12 times a day, and I'm sorry for saying that. Yes, of course. I believe in being honest, and I think the great thing about comedy and good comedy is actually it's quite close to the bone. It's getting out feelings that are very strong and dealing with feelings that may not always be designed to make you laugh, but just things you see that move you, or make you cross, or make you embarrassed, or make you ashamed, or something silly that you've done. But I do think that comedy is a slightly a way of sort of confessional, and that's part of it. And when I was writing, I mean, the decision to publish my diaries wasn't an easy one. And someone said, well, you kept your diaries all the time, why not just, instead of writing an autobiography, which I didn't want to do, why don't you let your diaries out? So I just did an edit of them. But I felt that the diaries had to reflect my life as a whole, including the unhappy times, as well as the happy times. In fact, particularly sometimes the unhappy times, because they're rather important. That's what we all go through. And I think people think comedians are just sort of very jolly people all the time, going laughing and utterly sort of thick-skinned, and I don't think they are at all. So that was what was important to me to put out in the diaries. And I think it's just, if you're going to be talking about yourself, you've got to talk about all the aspects of yourself.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but could you join me in thanking Michael Palin?
Thank you.
And there's another session in here in 10 minutes, which you'll all want to stay for. So if you could give Michael sort of time to walk out rather than... I know lots of people want selfies and things, but we're going to have to get him out first, and everyone else will need to follow. But he's got another session in the afternoon where he'll be talking about the Himalayas, so you need to be back for that one.